My girlfriend and I were in here playing pool. She said I need my cigarettes. I came out to get cigarettes out of the truck. When I walked out, I saw his legs and everything laying there.
Okay.
And I thought somebody got drunk, had too much, and I heard him say help.
Okay.
I came back around this side. I walked up on him. I saw the puddle. I thought it was vomit. I walked over there. When I got there, I realized it was blood. He said, help, help, I've been shot.
On the cold night of December 18th, 2017, a terrifying 911 call pierced through the quiet of Evansville, Indiana. It came in around 9 p.m., sending officers racing to a bar parking lot after reports of a shooting. What they would discover wasn't just a violent crime, it was a tangled story of trust, betrayal, and survival against the odds. When detectives arrived on the scene, the sight was grim. A young man lay bleeding on the cold pavement, barely clinging to life. Time was slipping through their fingers, and it was clear he needed urgent medical attention. But even as his life hung by a thread, this young man would become the key to unraveling a deeper, darker story. His name was Steve. He was only 20 years old.
You turned around looking at him, or are you looking at the rear?
Well, I did for a second. I saw me going. I just I kind of looked forward and just froze for a second, and then so a second or two later I heard a gunshot, and then I heard another gunshot. I felt my body just, I don't know, like almost levitate off the ground or something. I don't know.
Despite his critical injuries, Steve was conscious. He struggled to speak, his voice weak and breath short, but he still tried to answer the detective's questions.
What can I help you with?
Where did I get shot? We don't know yet. We're still looking, guys. Hey, you bleeding on the bottom there?
Just hang in there, brother.
Fortunately, he was breathing and he was able to speak with us. He actually said his name was Steve.
Are you having any trouble breathing, partner? Every 5 minutes. What I want you to do is just slowly keep taking your breaths in and out. Do you know how long you've been sitting out here?
They asked who shot him. Through pained, broken responses, Steve said the shooter was an older black man wearing a tan jacket. But the way he spoke made detectives suspect he wasn't giving them the full truth, at least not yet. Still, they pressed on. Every second mattered, and Steve might not make it through the night. As they waited for paramedics to arrive, they asked more questions. He said he hadn't seen the shooter before. He wasn't even at the bar, just in the parking lot. Steve mentioned that he'd arrived in his father's red Hyundai Sonata, but now the car was gone. He claimed the shooter had taken off with it, and his phone was still inside.
He's got the light. Look at the light. You're fine, partner. Keep breathing. Help your balance and breathe. Keep working through it. This is the shooting, and the guy stole the car. BOL for a red Honda Sonata. At this time, I do not have a year for the vehicle itself.
Let's get his dad's information. We can get a plate. I got it. I got it. Do I? Yeah. Yeah.
That detail about the missing car would soon open the door to something unexpected. The detectives acted quickly. As Steve was rushed to the hospital, they tried to track down the vehicle. With his father's name, they hoped to identify the car and maybe even find where it had gone.
Hey, Steve, what's your dad's name?
Come back. Okay, go up now. Go up.
You're good. Go up. Ryder.
I will take one, yes.
Hey, if you guys can get his dad's name at all, if you can't, I understand, but that way we can get a plate number for the vehicle.
His dad's?
His dad's name.
What's your dad's name? Scott.
But first, they needed to check the nearby security footage. The bar was located near a busy intersection, and fortunately, cameras overlooked some parts of the parking lot. When they reviewed the footage, the detectives saw Steve pulling into the lot in the red Sonata.
This property right here?
Yes.
Is there a way to access these cameras that we'd be able to see?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Part of the investigation, especially in this day and age, is getting video footage. Luckily, where this occurred at, this is a major intersection. So if we want to look at the parking lot video right away to see if there's anything there.
Yes.
Moments later, another man appeared, someone walking in the same direction wearing a jacket that fit the description Steve had given. But just as things were getting interesting, the camera coverage failed them. The actual spot where the shooting happened wasn't in view. There was no footage of the attack itself. However, the man was later seen getting into Steve's car and speeding away just minutes after the shooting. That small piece of video was crucial. It gave detectives their first real lead.
With the information that Steve had told us, description of the shooter, combined with the video that closely matched what the victim had told us, we believed that we had the suspect in that video.
Back at the hospital, something incredible happened. Steve survived. Despite his life-threatening injuries, he pulled through. For detectives, this was a game changer. Now that he was stable, they hoped he'd be willing and able to explain what really happened. And as they sat down with him again, Steve began to open up.
At this point, things start changing. Steve starts telling us the full story. He started to be honest with the detective and admitted that what had happened was that this is a drug deal that went bad.
What he said next shifted the entire investigation. Steve admitted he hadn't been completely honest. The truth was, the night of the shooting wasn't random.
So I'm going to tell you basically that night, okay? You told us that you went there to sell this guy dope, marijuana.
Yes.
Okay. Who set up this meeting?
Jaleel.
Okay, Jaleel. Did you guys meet up at Walmart that time?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
It wasn't just some stranger walking up and pulling the trigger. Steve had gone to the parking lot for a reason. He was there to sell marijuana. He had a small circle of regular buyers, and one of them was a guy named Jaleel. That night, Jaleel had contacted him about a friend who wanted to buy some weed. Steve didn't know the new buyer personally, but since Jaleel was someone he trusted, he agreed to the deal. The buyer's name was Jeremiah.
When did he say anything about Jeremiah? What was the context of that conversation?
He said, I have a buddy that needs some, so I said, yeah, it was okay. And then Jaleel said that he sent to my number. I was like, okay, that's fine.
The plan was simple. Meet in the parking lot, do the exchange, and go home. But something went horribly wrong. Steve never imagined that a trusted connection would lead him straight into danger. In hindsight, maybe there were signs. Maybe he should have questioned why the deal couldn't happen somewhere safer, or why this new buyer didn't reach out himself. But in that moment, Steve was just doing business as usual. When he arrived, Jeremiah was already there. Things escalated quickly, but Steve couldn't remember every detail. It happened in a blur.
Did you see him when you pulled in, or was...
I texted him saying here. He said, okay, be there in 2 minutes. I said, okay.
Was the car locked?
It was locked. So I saw it at the last second. I just locked it real quick.
Okay. All right. So is he completely in the car, or is his feet still outside, or do you know?
His feet were still kind of outside his front door.
He remembered facing forward, then hearing gunshots. He felt his body jolt, almost as if he'd been lifted off the ground. Then came the pain, intense and sudden. As he lay on the pavement, blood pooling beneath him, he must have known how close he was to dying. But he also knew something else. If he didn't say anything, if he didn't tell the truth, Jeremiah might get away with it. That's why, despite everything, he talked. He gave the detectives just enough to get started: names, locations, the stolen car, a description of the shooter. And thanks to that information, the investigation had a direction. The detectives now knew this wasn't a random act of violence. It was a drug deal gone wrong, arranged through someone Steve had trusted. They had a name, Jeremiah, and a link through Jaleel. With the security footage and Steve's testimony, they could begin piecing together the events of that night. It was clear that this crime wasn't just about drugs or theft. It was about betrayal, about how a single wrong decision, a single misplaced trust can turn deadly. Steve's bravery in those moments, choosing to speak, to reveal the truth, gave detectives the crucial edge they needed.
Are you turned around looking at him, or are you looking at the
Well, I did for a second. I saw the gun, and I just I looked forward and just froze for a second, and then a second or two later, I heard a gunshot, and then I heard another gunshot. And I felt my body just, I don't know, almost levitate off the ground or something. I don't know. I knew I had been shot. I didn't remember anything after that.
He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a survivor, and his voice would help bring justice one step closer. And yet, the story was far from over. Investigators still had to track down Jeremiah, verify every detail, and uncover what truly motivated the shooting. But thanks to Steve's honesty and determination to speak up, even through unimaginable pain, the truth had a fighting chance to come to light. Sometimes the smallest decision, to tell the truth, to ask for help, to trust the right people, can make all the difference between a cold case and a solved one. And in Steve's case, it just might save others from walking into the same deadly trap.
Actually informed them that there had been another person in the vehicle named Christopher Hoffling, who'd been his friend, and he possibly had been shot. At that point, everything just changed.
Steve thought he was heading out for a simple, low-key drug deal. A friend named Yal had connected him with someone named Jeremiah, and Steve was under the impression that the meeting would be quick, just a typical exchange. He wasn't expecting trouble. He even confirmed with Jeremiah that he'd arrived at the location, texting him and getting the reply, "Be there in 2 minutes." But what happened next shattered that assumption. As Steve sat in his car waiting, he noticed Jeremiah approaching. What he didn't expect was that Jeremiah was armed. Within seconds, the situation spun out of control. Steve only had time to register the gun before shots rang out. One moment he was in the driver's seat, then suddenly his body jolted. A gunshot hit him, followed by another. He felt his body almost lift off the seat. Then numbness.
I didn't know if Chris got shot by the first shot or if he just shot up into the air or what happened. But like, I know I got shot, and that's all I could like focus on.
He couldn't move. He knew he'd been shot, but his mind went blank after that. What Steve didn't immediately reveal, though, changed everything. He hadn't been alone in the car. His friend, Christopher Hoffling, was in the passenger seat, and now both of them had been targeted. Steve had no idea whether Chris had been shot first or whether the shots were random, but it was clear Jeremiah wasn't just there for a deal. He had a far more violent plan.
You remember what happened then?
I got shot. I lay there for a second so I couldn't move, and then I
You
felt
lay-
my head slam on the concrete.
When you say you lay there, are you talking about in the car?
Yeah, I was just sitting in the car.
Okay. And then you felt your head hit the concrete.
Yeah, I felt my whole body. It had slammed into the concrete.
Steve later recalled drifting in and out of awareness. After being shot, he was dragged from the car and thrown onto the pavement. His head hit the concrete hard. He lay there, frozen and helpless, trying to make sense of what had just happened. At some point, he managed to move just enough to look toward the car, but Chris was gone. So was the vehicle. Jeremiah had taken off, leaving Steve wounded on the side of the road.
Do you remember the car driving off?
Oh, yeah, because I hit the ground, and there's no way for me to just be pulled out of the car unless he's stealing it. Then I was right next to the car, so I lay there. I could move. My head would move. My arms would move. And finally, I don't know how I moved my head, but I turned to see if Chris was there, and he was gone too. So the car and Chris was gone.
The case now shifted dramatically. What had seemed like an assault or a botched robbery was now a possible double shooting. Detectives raced to piece together the scene, and their biggest concern was finding Chris, alive or otherwise. While Steve was receiving medical attention, detectives began the search for the stolen vehicle and for Chris, who might still be inside. They contacted Chris's father, hoping he could help them track down his son. But the father hadn't seen Chris and had no idea his son had been involved in anything dangerous.
Are you related to Chris?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Now, who's your relationship?
Son.
Okay. You know here?
Chris is not here. He drives a red truck. He's not here.
Okay. Does he stay here with you on a regular basis?
He comes and goes. He's got a friend at the apartment. Why has he done something?
Well, we don't know.
Still, he cooperated, trying to call his son's phone while detectives anxiously waited for any signal. But there was no answer.
There's another gentleman that's been shot, and all they can get out of him is that Chris was possibly with him, and that he possibly was shot. So we're trying to locate him and find out if he has been or not.
As the hours passed, hope started slipping. Investigators feared that if Chris had been shot and was still in the car, he might not survive without medical help. Steve's comment about leaving his phone in the car gave the detectives a small lead. They could track its location.
Okay, gets in touch with you. Just like I said, the other person that was shot said that he thought that your son Chris had been shot also.
You didn't. Oh, Chris didn't do it.
No, sir. No, we think Chris may have.
Oh, he might have been. He might have been on the receiving end too.
Yes, sir.
I mean, he's a good kid, so you know.
Okay. Well, like I said, we're just going off limited information. So.
Well, I appreciate it. So then I would, if I hear anything, I will let you.
Just call 911. So Officer Matt Taylor came by.
Using the phone's GPS, They narrowed the search down to a residential area near Washington and Lombard Avenue, just 5 minutes from where the shooting occurred. It wasn't much, but it was their best lead. Officers canvassed the neighborhood the next morning, hoping the car hadn't been moved too far.
One of the things the phone records showed us was the last location known of Steve's phone, and that was in the area of Washington and Lombard Avenue. We're residential area, not a whole lot goes on there. It's within about 5 minutes of where the shooting happened. So we concentrated on that area that next morning, believing that we're going to find the vehicle somewhere close.
Then came the breakthrough. Tucked inside a garage in that very area was the red Hyundai Sonata. Officers found it parked, quiet, and undisturbed. But what they discovered inside would turn the case into a full-blown homicide.
Officers started looking, and lo and behold, they found the vehicle there parked in the garage, the red Sonata, and inside there we found the victim, Christopher, lying in the passenger seat, slumped over at that time. He'd been shot about 4 times, and he was deceased. So everything again changed in this case now, because not only before we had an attempted murder, we had a stolen vehicle, now we had an actual homicide that's happened.
Chris was still in the passenger seat. He had been shot multiple times and was slumped over, lifeless. The moment was devastating. Not only had the detectives failed to reach him in time, but Chris's family was about to have their lives shattered. What began as a case of attempted murder and vehicle theft was now a homicide investigation. With the vehicle recovered and the body found, the hunt for the shooter intensified. But there were still questions. Who had actually pulled the trigger? Jeremiah or Jaleel? Were they even real names?
We also were able to learn through these records that Jaleel's real name is Jaleel Fellows. Jeremiah, that was supposed to be buying the weed from Steve, that was an alias, and that his real name was Earl Martin.
Steve's phone records turned out to be more useful than just for location tracking. Investigators uncovered that Jaleel was an alias. His real name was Jaleel Fellows. As for Jeremiah, the man who'd pulled the gun, his actual identity was Earl Martin.
When checking the real name of Earl Martin, we discover that he is on parole and he's got an arrest record and a history of a previous robbery, which kind of heightens the detectives on his involvement, because this would fall into line of what happened this evening.
Digging into Earl Martin's background raised even more alarm. He was on parole and already had a record that included robbery. His past, coupled with the events of that night, painted a clear picture of someone capable of deadly violence. His history fit the crime, a setup, an ambush, and a brutal execution of both a drug deal and 2 innocent men. Now the detectives were dealing with more than a failed drug deal gone wrong. It was a calculated act, and the focus shifted to capturing those responsible before they could disappear completely. The clock was ticking once again, only this time, justice was the goal.
There you go, man. All right. Hey, I'm Dave from the police department, okay? I'm the detective. I'm sorry. I understand. A lot of times the guys that bring you in here, they don't know what's going on, man. They're just told to bring somebody in. I don't know, you know. I understand you're probably frustrated on how long you've been sitting around.
Yeah, for a while.
Okay, all right. Well, can I do anything to make you more comfortable? You good?
Just tell me what I'm charged with.
Okay. Well, you're in a locked facility. You're talking to me, okay? So I gotta read you Miranda warnings, okay?
Yeah.
You understand that? You understand, right?
After identifying Earl as a potential suspect, detectives tracked down his address and brought him in for questioning. At first, the tone was calm and respectful. The officers tried to build trust, offering small gestures of comfort and making it clear that Earl wasn't being judged. They explained that bringing him in didn't necessarily mean he was guilty. It was just part of their process. But Earl wasn't interested in small talk. He only wanted to know one thing: what he was being charged with.
Want to talk to me?
I just want to know what I'm being charged with.
Okay. You want to talk to me then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Man, I'm here to talk to you about some stuff that happened last night. Okay? You want to tell me where you were last night?
Well, you want to tell me if am I being charged with anything?
I can't tell you one way or the other right now. That's why we're talking.
The detectives didn't give him a direct answer. Instead, they tried to draw him into a conversation, hoping he'd give up details voluntarily.
Okay.
I think you would know. I mean, you're a detective. You've been doing this for a while. You know, I've been in the system.
I know you're, man, listen, I know you're not dumb. I seen that you have, you know, a prior for strong arm and stuff like that, so I'm not trying to play you for a fool. I know you know how the game works.
Okay, so I'll be in charge, in other words.
That's why we're here talking. That's why I want to talk to you.
They reminded him that evidence had already started piling up: surveillance cameras, timelines, and a growing body of clues. Yet Earl, familiar with the system and experienced in how interrogations worked, refused to open up.
All right, well then I'll
listen.
Better.
The bottom line is this: last night, some stuff happened, okay, and it didn't happen in the best spot. There's cameras everywhere. There's a lot of moving parts, okay.
He knew his rights and made it clear that unless charges were placed, he wasn't going to talk. He asked for a lawyer and shut down the conversation completely.
Yeah, I think if I'm being charged with something, I better have an attorney. I just think that's for the best. I don't really exactly know what you're talking about, so go ahead and charge me, and I'll figure it out when I go to court.
Okay. So time when we talk with you, okay?
All right.
With Earl refusing to cooperate, detectives turned their attention to Jalil. But before they could find him, Jalil had already learned about the homicide from news reports and social media. The story was spreading fast. The vehicle had been recovered. Chris was dead. Steve had narrowly survived. Jalil knew it was serious. Instead of waiting for police to knock on his door, he went to the station himself, with his mother by his side.
Social media, it's made it across news networks. They've also reported on the fact at this point the vehicle's been found, there's been a homicide. So Jalil knows that police are looking for him. And what he actually does is his mom brings him downtown to talk to detectives. So he actually came on his own accord, wanted to speak with detectives, and kind of headed off a little bit.
Detectives greeted him with appreciation. Unlike Earl, Jalil appeared open and willing to help. He admitted knowing Steve, saying he used to buy marijuana from him. He explained that he had once mentioned Steve to Earl, but insisted it was nothing more than casual conversation, no criminal planning, no conspiracy.
Glad you came down here, man, really. Speaks a lot about you. Got your mom with you. I respect the fact and I appreciate the fact you came down here on your own. It says a lot.
Detectives weren't satisfied with surface-level answers. They wanted to know if Jalil believed Earl was capable of something this extreme. Jalil claimed he barely knew the man, saying their conversations had never gone beyond work and minor interactions. But when the topic of the actual murder came up, Jalil backed off. He avoided specifics, speaking in vague terms and offering little clarity.
Do you know why you're here? Okay. Tell me about it.
I've seen that you guys found a car or something in the river on the news. Well, I didn't see it, but my mom was telling me about it today, so I kind of think it has something to do with that.
Okay.
As the detectives noticed this shift, they changed their strategy. Instead of pushing harder, they reassured Jalil. They told him he didn't seem like a bad person. They said his decision to come in voluntarily spoke volumes. By framing their questions as a way to understand the full story, rather than pin blame, they hoped to earn his trust.
Did you know that Earl's capable of something like this?
I mean, I really didn't know Earl. I mean, that's what, I really didn't know him. I mean, I've talked to him at work. I mean, kid around, but nothing about no robberies or nothing like that.
Then they confronted him with hard facts, text messages, evidence that showed he had been communicating with Earl, possibly even about the robbery. Still, Jalil denied knowing that the situation would turn violent. He said he didn't expect anyone to get hurt. In fact, he claimed to have been just as shocked by the news as everyone else.
I mean, I've read that little report on the internet, and then I was like, it just threw me for a loop.
I'm sure it was a gut wrencher, man. Yeah. Is that why you and your mama?
Yeah, we're just, yes.
Uh-huh.
And like, I don't even know what to say.
When asked directly whether he believed Earl's intention was to rob or kill, Jalil said he didn't know. His answers were cautious, and eventually he chose to stop the conversation altogether. He asked whether he needed a lawyer, an indication that he realized the conversation was becoming risky.
I got all the text messages, man. Okay? And that stuff, at this point, man, I just gotta wonder, like, did you know this robbery was gonna turn out to be murder? You know what I'm saying? Did you know?
I didn't know it was gonna be a murder. I didn't know.
I like to think that.
I really didn't.
Okay.
I didn't.
So the robbery, let me just say this. Earl, okay, he hits these 2 punks for dope. He takes their weed. That's a small drop in the bucket to murder.
At this point, detectives were certain that both Earl and Jalil knew more than they were admitting. Their statements were calculated and guarded, but the silence only made investigators more determined. With the interviews stalled, they decided to shift gears. A search warrant was issued for Earl's home, where they hoped to find concrete evidence, anything from clothing to weapons to physical traces, that could tie him directly to the crime scene. The clock was ticking, and the detectives knew that breaking the case wide open would require more than words.
During this time, with the fact that we have 2 suspects that are not providing much information, a search warrant is obtained for Earl Martin's home. The search warrant is executed, and we're looking for any evidentiary value, any clothing items, weapons, blood, trace evidence, anything at all that will link him to the actual shooting scene.
When detectives executed a search warrant at Earl Martin's house, they weren't prepared for just how much they'd uncover. Tucked away in his home was a tan jacket, the very same one Earl had worn on the night of the shooting. But this time it wasn't just a jacket, it had blood on it, and not just any blood. It would later be confirmed to belong to Steve, one of the 2 victims from that tragic night.
The search warrant did provide some very useful evidence in this case. Bloody clothing was found in Earl Martin's residence, and the clothing matched the video surveillance of this older black male with a tan jacket. We also found a bag containing a .380 handgun with some marijuana in the actual bag and some unspent rounds.
As investigators dug deeper, they discovered more damning evidence. A .380 handgun was found along with marijuana, all in the same bag. That handgun turned out to be the weapon used in the crime. The bullet casings recovered from the scene matched it exactly. Suddenly, the case against Earl wasn't just a matter of suspicion anymore, it was becoming rock solid.
That evidence being sent to the lab and later on came back and confirmed that the blood on the clothing belonged to Steve, and the handgun and the bullets matched the firearms and casings that were found at the scene of the crime.
The detectives had what they needed to connect Earl to the shooting, but there were still questions lingering about his friend, Jalil Fellows. Jalil had distanced himself from the crime, trying to present Earl as the lone wolf. But detectives weren't convinced. They decided to pull the phone records of both men, and that's when everything changed. Inside those phones was a digital trail that unraveled the real story. It turned out the robbery wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. It had been planned. Both Earl and Jalil had known in advance what was going to happen. The messages they exchanged made it clear that the goal had always been to rob Steve, who they knew carried cash and marijuana. Jalil wasn't there when the shots were fired, but he had played his part in setting up the whole thing.
Detectives also obtained search warrants for both cell phones belonging to Jalil Fellows and Earl Martin. And the information that was recovered from those cell phones proved 100% that both of those people, Earl Martin and Jalil Fellows, both knew that there was going to be a robbery attempt. And that was apparently the actual plan to rob Steve of his money and marijuana. But Earl Martin is the actual shooter. So with that information all coming together, there was enough evidence where arrest warrants were obtained for both Earl Martin and Jalil Fellows.
With both men tied to the crime, one as the shooter and the other as the mastermind behind the setup, the detectives issued arrest warrants. Still, neither Earl nor Jalil said a word in their defense. They stayed silent. Months passed.
Jalil, really, I'm perfectly okay with just basically starting from the beginning. We discussed before your relationship, how you knew Earl Martin. You know what I mean? And I don't doubt you told me 100% the truth on everything.
I don't have any reason to doubt that. But with that said, if anything is different, it's okay. It's not a big deal. Don't feel like, I got to stick to my guns because I've already told them something once. Okay, don't worry about that. Don't even think.
Then, on July 12th, 2018, something shifted. With the trial approaching, Jalil finally broke his silence. Perhaps it was guilt, or maybe it was a strategic move to get a lighter sentence. Either way, he showed up with his lawyer and chose to come clean about what really happened. Jalil explained how he knew Earl as his former boss, someone he'd gotten close to over time. Their conversations eventually veered into desperate ideas for quick money. That's when the robbery plan took shape.
He is a pretty good worker for me, and like we just kind of talked about stuff with like kids and stuff like that. We really didn't talk about much, but then we started talking about like trying to find out a way to get some quick money or whatever, and that's how it came up on the robbery scheme. And he asked me if I knew anybody, and I told him no at first, but then I really did know some people. So then I thought about it, and I just sent him a text saying that we could hit up my plug or whatever. And that's whenever the plan got into motion, I guess. I told him he could hit him up. I had to ask him if I could get out his number first.
Jalil recalled initially denying he knew anyone they could rob, but soon after he changed his mind. He texted Earl suggesting they target Steve, someone Jalil had a connection to. Although Jalil insisted he had no idea Earl planned to kill anyone, he admitted that he knowingly put Earl in touch with Steve, fully aware that a robbery was on the table. After the shooting, Earl had called Jalil. The conversation was brief. Earl just said things had gone badly and told him to watch the news. That's how Jalil found out someone had been shot.
He told me that he asked if he could call me, and I said yeah. In one of the text messages, and then he called and he's like, you'll see, he's like, stuff went bad and you'll see it on the news. That's all he said. And then we hung up, and that was the last we talked.
Okay. So that was afterwards.
Yeah.
I seen the text. I know the text.
It had been afterwards because he just like stuff went bad and you'll see it on the news. That's basically what he told me, and then I seen it on the news, like where it kind of happened or whatever. So that's how I really figured out like what was going on.
By the end of the confession, detectives had a clear timeline. Jalil had orchestrated the connection. Earl had pulled the trigger. Steve, somehow, had survived the attack, but Christopher didn't make it. It was a robbery gone horribly wrong, leaving behind shattered lives and irreversible damage. And finally, both men were going to be held accountable.
So Jalil, even though he minimized his involvement, he had set it up. He knew what was going to happen, that Steve and Christopher were going to get robbed. They had met in the parking lot. Earl Martin got in the back seat of the car, and he instantly just shot both Steve and Christopher. Steve was able to get out of the vehicle and survive. Unfortunately, Christopher, he didn't survive.
As the pieces of the investigation came together, the motive behind the crime became heartbreakingly clear. It wasn't personal. It wasn't driven by rage or revenge. It was all about theft, stealing marijuana. That's what made the entire incident even more tragic. Two young men, Steve and Christopher, were caught in the crosshairs of a robbery gone wrong, orchestrated by someone who had spent much of his life circling in and out of the justice system. Earl Martin wasn't new to crime. His record showed a long history of trouble with the law, painting a picture of someone who had chosen a path of violence and recklessness. Steve and Christopher didn't stand a chance the moment they crossed paths with him that night. Once all the evidence had been presented, the law took its course.
For the crimes involving Christopher Hoffling and Steve, the charges for Earl Martin are murder, robbery with serious bodily injury, murder attempted with a firearm, and kidnapping while hijacking a vehicle. Earl Martin is convicted and sentenced to 135 years in prison. Joel Fellows is convicted of robbery. He's sentenced to 5 years as part of a plea deal.
Earl was charged with multiple serious crimes: murder, robbery causing serious injury, attempted murder with a firearm, and kidnapping during a carjacking. The court found him guilty, and he was sentenced to 135 years in prison, ensuring he would never harm anyone again. Jalil Fellows, whose involvement had initially seemed unclear, was convicted of robbery. Thanks to a plea deal, he received a 5-year sentence. While his punishment was lighter, the consequences of his actions will likely stay with him for a lifetime. Though justice was served, it could never bring back Christopher. His family was left to carry the unbearable weight of his loss. And even for survivors like Steve, the scars, both physical and emotional, would never truly heal.